So for the majority of my journeys, whether it was my entrepreneurial journey, whether it was my podcast journey, for the majority of those journeys, I have spent a significant amount of time in motion. Now, these youngsters these days, they use that term motion as if it's a good thing. I've heard some youngsters say, I got that motion, whatever it is. I'm not sure exactly what they mean. But in my case, when I say that I had spent a significant amount of time in motion, it wasn't a good thing. Now, being in motion can be good, but it's not all what it's cracked up to be. I think about my entrepreneurial journey when I was trying to build businesses and I was working on my side hustles. I would be in motion, meaning that I would do like a lot of brainstorming and I would do a lot of planning and I would take notes. I would go and attend seminars and conferences and summits. And I would go there in hopes of I would learn something, that something will resonate with me for me to use it to build my business. And I spent a lot of that time just planning and strategizing. But it really didn't work out for me because I didn't apply the information that I learned. And when I look back on this, I was a hoarder. I was preparing for hibernation. You know, there are certain animals who prepare for hibernation. What they do is they'll gather resources, they'll gather food, and then they go into deep hibernation. In other words, they will go to sleep. And that's what I pretty much did with the information that I would get from these different spaces. I would go in there and I would take notes and I would be motivated. I would be excited. And I would tell myself when I left that space, I'm going to build this business. And I never really did. I think about my podcast journey. Now, if we've been connected long enough, you know my journey as a podcaster, as a content creator of the Growth Times Infinity podcast. I started off with audio from 1 to like 180 something episodes, and then eventually I transitioned to YouTube and I started making video podcasts. But before then, I was in motion for a large part of that journey. Shout out to Ozil de Bastos, who is not only a good brother of mine, but he's also my podcast coach. And I remember when I first met him, he would hold these in-person events for his group, Pod Houston, which is a group of podcasters, a group of content creators in the city of Houston. I remember going to the first meeting and I met Ozil, good brother. He invited me in with open arms. I went to my first Pod Houston event. And then from there, I went to my second one. And I went to numerous Pod Houston events. And I was hyped. I was telling you, I was hyped. I was looking forward to starting my podcast. So as I attended these in-person events, I went to a podcast boot camp held and hosted by Ozil. So I went to the events. I went through this boot camp as it prepared me to launch my podcast. So I was ready to go. About a year went by, almost a year went by. And then months later, after attending the events, after going through the podcast boot camp, I had a coaching session with Ozil. And Ozil asked me, Reggie, why haven't you started your podcast yet? And looking back on it, when I explained to him why I didn't launch my podcast, I gave him a bunch of excuses. If I recall, I said something like, I didn't have an intro, I didn't have an outro. I know what I want to talk about, which is self-improvement, personal development. I know what I want to talk about, but I don't have my subjects, I don't have my topics lined up. I don't know if I want to bring on guests or not. As I mentioned, I was giving him a bunch of excuses. And after expressing that to Ozil, he only had a few words for me. He said, Reggie, just push record. And that's what I did. I just pressed record. And all that stuff, all them excuses I shared with him, it didn't matter anymore. All I really had to do in the first place was just push record. And all that stuff I was talking about that I didn't have in place, what I thought that I needed, it all fell into place as I was going through the podcast. So before I pressed record, I was in motion instead of taking action. And there is a difference between the two. There's motion. It is where you are planning, where you're strategizing, brainstorming, and you're learning. As I mentioned, that's what I was doing as I was preparing to launch my podcast. I was in motion. Now, action, on the other hand, is what I wasn't doing. Action is producing results. Action is delivering an outcome. I should have took action before January 2020. That's when I launched the very first episode of the Growth Times Infinity podcast. But I did, and I guess you could say better late than never. And here we are, almost 330 episodes of the Growth Times Infinity podcast between audio and video. So yeah, and it wasn't only for the podcast, but it was also just my entrepreneurial journey, just in general. Just I would always stay in motion instead of applying action. And this is my advice to you all. If you are in a similar situation right now, I would encourage you to be in motion for a limited time. It's great to be in motion. It's great to plan and brainstorm and strategize and go to these different events, go into these different spaces and, just learn what you need to. You need to do that. But only do it for a limited time. The sooner you take action, the better. And another thing about motion is that motion can be tricky. You see, motion can feel like that you're actually doing something. It could actually feel like that you're taking action. Don't let motion fool you. It's great to brainstorm and it's great to plan, but you're not getting the results that you would get from taking action. That's the difference. And I remember, and by the way, this is my first takeaway from chapter 11 from the book Atomic Habits. My first takeaway is that motion and action, they're two different things. And as I was reading about this, I thought about how I would label myself a procrastinator. You may have heard this story before too. I was a self-proclaimed procrastinator. I had the audacity to tell people that I was a procrastinator. And I realized from reading this chapter in the book Atomic Habits that my procrastination, the source of it, was being in motion. So yeah, this particular part of the chapter truly resonated with me. Remember the difference between motion and action. Motion is all about planning, putting yourself in place, learning, strategizing. Action is where it's at. My guy, Marshawn Lynch, said, you got to be about that action, boss. That's where you are producing results. That's where you will get the outcome that you're seeking. So that's my first takeaway from chapter 11. My second takeaway, I learned about habit formation. Now, according to the chapter, habit formation, the definition of it is the process by which a behavior becomes progressively more automatic through repetition. So in other words, if you are looking to implement good, effective habits, if you're looking to form new habits, you got to put in them reps. You got to put in that work. Because if you think about it, most of our habits that we currently have, if not all of our habits, are formed because we put the reps in. The good habits that we have, and also the bad habits. We are currently engaging in those habits because we put in the reps. We didn't just do that habit one time. We did it the first time, and then we did it the second time, and then we did it numerous times to the point where it became a habit, to the point where it becomes automatic and unconscious. When it comes to implementing good, effective habits, that's where we want to get to. We want to get to that point where it becomes automatic and unconscious. And in order for us to get to that, you got to put in the reps. Something else that really resonated with me in chapter 11. James Clear speaks on how people would ask him, and I feel like there are a number of us, we may ask someone this question, or we may ask ourselves this question. We may have Googled this question before. How long does it take to build a new habit? Depending on what it is. And I know y'all have seen the answer to that. Certain habits may take 14 days. Some habits may take 28 days, a month, 3 months, whatever the case may be. Now, something James Clear said in this chapter, he encouraged people to ask this question instead. Instead of asking, how long does it take to build a new habit? Perhaps we should be asking, how many does it take to form a new habit? In other words, how many reps do we need to put in to form a new habit? Because that's where it's at. That's in the definition of habit formation. And the answer to that is, you just have to be consistent depending on what the habit is. You just have to put in the reps, and you just have to be consistent. Something else that was mentioned in chapter 11 is to build a habit, you need to practice it. And that involves putting the reps in. Practice, practice, practice. Don't let Allen Iverson fool you. We're going to talk about practice. If we're trying to formulate these new habits, if we're trying to implement these new habits, you got to practice. That's what you got to do. Because they say that practice makes perfect. But something else I picked up along the way in my journey, during my spiritual development journey, practice doesn't necessarily make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And that's where we want to get to when it comes to implementing our good, effective habits, especially this new year. If you're working on implementing good habits, practice makes permanent. And I definitely want to encourage you to keep striving, keep putting in them reps until your new habits become automatic and unconscious. Peace and blessings to you as you continue your journey. So let me know what you think about this video. Have you been reading the book Atomic Habits by James Clear? We are at chapter 11. So let me know what you think about it. And I want to ask you this question. As you go forward, do you understand the assignment? How many reps do you plan on putting in to form that new habit that you have a desire to do? That's your question. Think about it. As always, I am Reggie B, and I appreciate you all tuning into this episode of the Growth Times Infinity podcast. Feel free to leave a comment below if you're just dropping by, and if you haven't yet, feel free to hit that subscribe button. And until the next time, keep growing and keep going.